under Xi Jinping, a number of laws have been enacted that require complete and total capitulation in terms of data access. This is a national security law. It's a number of cybersecurity laws and the way they've been amended over the last several years that require that every Chinese company operating in China or anywhere else in the world, including a subsidiary. So you take like a Chinese company like ByteDance, their subsidiary TikTok is equally required under these laws to provide every bit and byte of data that they collect, that they store, that transits their network, or that in any other way touches what they're doing. It must be made available. There is no get out of jail free card. There is no denying that. Anyone who doesn't do that doesn't stay in business very long. So that's every Chinese company, no matter where they operate. Those same requirements apply to every foreign company operating inside China. So previously, you would take a large company operating in China, and they would use certain networking strategies or virtual private networks like encryption and other technologies to try and hide or prevent the Chinese government from accessing certain information. In 2019, I believe, or it may have been 2020, they passed a law, the Chinese government passed a law that made that type of networking strategy and those types of encryption capabilities illegal. So you can technically have encryption, but only up into a certain level and no level that the Chinese government can't crack, essentially. So at the end of the day, by law, the Chinese government gets everything. And companies, by that same law, are required not to admit that. Okay, so that's one of the key dynamics that has changed. Up until that point, a lot of Western companies thought, okay, the loss of intellectual property and having to comply with Chinese law, that's just the cost of doing business, but the market is so great and the economic upside is so significant that it's worth kind of paying that tax. I think with the enactment of these laws and with the growing crackdown by the CCP against non-Chinese tech companies, the economics are changing, and it's causing these companies to reevaluate. And then on top of that, you have the geopolitical situation where you have the United States and China, obviously, and not in any way changing anytime soon, moving toward a more confrontational posture. And then things like the disruption, the supply chain disruptions that came with COVID-19. That was a real wake-up call as well. So we've had a couple of key variables that have occurred over the last 3 years, frankly, that are causing people, the tech industry specifically, to reevaluate. And then I'll give a concrete example and then I'll stop talking. It was reported widely in the United States several years ago that Google was reconsidering opening its business practices in China. It was going to do search, it was going to do a number of different things. And when that leaked, there was a huge outcry about it. About 4,000, several thousand Google employees organized and said, we don't want to do this in China. And about that time, Google had opened up a brand new artificial intelligence research center in Beijing. Concurrently, Google withdrew from a contract with the United States Department of Defense called Project Maven, where it was helping do some artificial intelligence research, saying that working with the US government was violating its AI principles. So it's taking these two strange actions. It's increasing or considering increasing its presence in China and decreasing its willingness to work with US government. Well, that clearly sent a message here in the United States, and I'm on record and publicly chastised them for both of those decisions. Okay. As a demonstration of how things have changed, in just the last year and a half, Google has canceled all plans to do business in China. It has closed that artificial intelligence research center in Beijing, and it is now actively pursuing and winning US defense and government cloud contracts. And I think that's an exemplar of how one major industry player is recognizing that the situation on the ground has changed, that frankly, they're going to have to choose a flag because of the way primarily China is operating. And I think that's an example of one company who has made its choice. And that is one of the reasons why I feel a certain level of optimism about how that industry is ultimately going to react.
Perhaps they're responding to the Kissinger dictum that a little trade lost can be recovered somewhere, freedom lost cannot be regained.
And I think that's exactly right. But again, taking an action on China, similar to what we did with Russia, is a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
The choice to act against Russia by industry wasn't nearly as costly as what China would be.
Yeah.
And then the same thing applies to Western governments. Western governments, particularly our friends in Europe, are not going to be nearly as quick and decisive and aggressive in their response to China as they have in Russia.
There are still European countries considering allowing Huawei into their communications networks because they're so cheap right now.
Yeah,
and they must be aware
that's right.
that simply means all their data and their citizens' data goes straight to Beijing.
But see, that goes to my point about...
and it also risks their relationships with the United States, I would have thought.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.